back. You guys are tuned into the Chappy Bengals Podcast. Today is Saturday, January 11th. It's Wild Card Weekend. We're going to be going over the slate of games here to start. We got a couple hours till the kickoff in the Houston game. I'm here joined by my co-host Chappy. Chappy, how you doing on this Saturday morning, man?
Good, man. Excited for some playoff ball. We got a good slate ahead of us. Chargers, Texans, Steelers, Ravens. Love it.
Ready to roll. Yep. So today what we got in store is we're going to be going over a few things, obviously news and notes, some headlines from around the league to start, and then we're going to get into the matchups, kind of dissect these, give you guys some of the props that we like, some of the picks, and then we're going to get into also our own playoff bracket, and we're going to see how me and Chappy fare here.
The play-action bracket.
Yeah. Play-action bracket. So we're going to see how that goes. Now, let's start off with kind of some of the news and the headlines that have come out. I think you guys over on the West Coast, obviously you've seen the wildfires that are going on down there. Pretty crazy. So obviously thoughts and prayers if you are in the area. Hopefully you got out safe and just hoping this thing ends sooner than later. But with news coming from that is the Rams and the Vikings game has been moved to Arizona because of the fires. Now, I'm kind of curious how you would feel being the home team in this situation.
You know what's wild as well, and this is just the irony of the situation. I'm not sure if you saw it, but the State Farm Insurance is the the owners.
That's pretty
Arizona
ironic,
State.
right?
Yeah, and I think when you break that down, that's just crazy to me that all the stuff that's coming with the insurance stuff that's coming from the fires is then it's just a weird, ironic situation. Again, prayers and hopes for everyone that's been dealing with that stuff. But kind of back to your question, if you kind of go into this, I think if you're the home team, you know, you're prepping. I think the biggest thing right now out of this, I believe, is the situation with the winner of that game. We'll have to pack up again thereafter and make another move. And I think that's the biggest thing is now you have these different flights and how that affects you in different travel situations. It's not a big flight by any means, but I think it is something to kind of take into account. But this has just been crazy, this whole thing in general, having to move stadiums, having to have a switch up on this all and all the plans that come with this where you're planning to have that advantage, right? And then you obviously don't. So that's a massive thing, especially in playoff football.
And chances are this is going to be the Rams' only home game, right? They're the 4 seed. This is their only home game they're going to get, and that's unfortunate. Now you got to move and relocate, and it's going to be a little bit more of a neutral site here. So it would suck. If I'm a Rams player, I'm like, wow, that fucking sucks. You know, you clinch your division, you don't even get your home game. But, I mean, what can you do? Wildfires kind of shut that down.
Yep.
But on to some other stuff here. College football final. I don't know if you tuned in at any of these games, Jeff. Last night, Ohio State punched their ticket to the final. They beat Texas, so now we got Notre Dame versus Ohio State in the finals. I know my family's in Notre Dame fans. I got some of the coaches that I coach with, they're Ohio State fans, so it's going to be a big game. I think the favorite here is Ohio State with the roster they got, and I just feel like they've always been knocking on the door and just come up short. So that will be a wicked game to watch. I'm excited to see that. And then some other news we got here. Deshaun Watson, little update on his injury recovery here. Tears his ACL again, his Achilles again. Ruptured Achilles. So his status for 2025 is up in the air. Is this the last we're going to see of Deshaun Watson?
Might be, but what a way to do it. Just re-sign contracts and then do all this other stuff and renegotiate things, and then this happens. It just kind of sucks for him, obviously, but there's also a lot of shit that's going on with him. So I think that compounded with the contract stuff, I think this is going to be one of those situations where it wraps up sooner than anticipated. And I think we talked about the even the play wasn't there to that point as well. So it's kind of just like you're dragging something out to drag something out. It's almost like ownership committing to something, and it's just not going well. So you got to cut ties at some point with this and move forward. Otherwise, it's just going to be like we saw what Cleveland was post it, right? And I think that that explains everything to me as to where you should probably head in this direction.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it sucks for him, but it's the situation that's unfolded, and that's the NFL, man. It's very quick and cutthroat, and
I think like with his injury history, he's had multiple ACL tears.
Yeah.
With this now, I think, listen, like, you got your bag. Unfortunately, this might go down as one of the worst trades in NFL history.
Guaranteed.
If not the worst trade in NFL history. And I think you take it and you move on. Ever since he's gotten back on the field, it just doesn't seem like he's been able to even focus on football with what's going on in the background and everything. Like, hey, dude, you got paid. Take your money and just
redistribute it, baby. Right? I don't know how that's gonna go.
Just wrap it up, man.
There's a lot of background noise here, so I think it's time to, especially just for Cleveland. Like, that was just such a poor decision. Like, just an ultimate.
I mean, when you're desperate, right? You do desperate things, and unbelievable to the fact that they did that, and also screwed up the quarterback market in
Bucks
the process
by
guaranteeing. Yeah.
Yeah, you would have wanted to wait on that guy, and I think that just speaks again to the team, the organization, and how they treat these guys in these situations. Because now you just went out and tried to get a guy. I don't even know really. Like, obviously they thought the talent was going to be there, but funny enough, just the irony of it was the talent was already there. So
crazy. So there's that. We also got some head coaching stuff going around. I think the biggest one actually just got an update. Ben Johnson to the Raiders is picking up some steam. So obviously him being one of the top
Belichick
head coaches
to the Raiders is not going to happen.
Not going to happen. They axed that. Yeah. But I mean, Ben Johnson is probably the hottest candidate.
Definitely.
Right now for a head coaching gig. I was talking about how I want to see the Raiders get a good replacement at head coach. That would be awesome to see. They definitely need some success. So that would be a good start, getting Ben Johnson there. Nothing massive. We know the Jets are interviewing everybody and anybody currently at this point. But we'll keep you guys updated with coaching stuff as we go along here. And then, so the AP All-Pro teams kind of came out. I don't know if you got a chance to take a look at that, but I have it pulled up here, and I was looking at it, and I'm like, I was just curious to get your thoughts on, if anybody got snubbed necessarily, or if you thought like some people were deserving of, first team, second team, etc. But what were your thoughts on that, quick?
Well, why don't you
anything stand out?
Why don't you talk about the QB all pro situation? Why don't you bring up that one first? Let's.
Well, I mean, like you got first team all pro. You got Lamar Jackson, right? But
what does that mean typically?
I mean, for me, I look at it, and you know how I feel about Lamar Jackson, but it's at this point, I don't like you get the MVP votes and everything. It's a popularity contest, and it's narrative driven.
Yeah.
I don't need to get into how I feel about that, but as far as I'm concerned, and I think it was PFF and multiple other websites, organizations have released these different rankings and stuff, and they've shown Joe Burrow to be the number one purest passer in the league.
Yes.
And from a quarterback perspective, I'm not talking about overall talent. I'm talking about given circumstances. I'm talking about what you can do as a quarterback and the talent that you have there.
Yep.
I personally think, and obviously, like, I'm going to tell you this all the time, like, Joe Burrow should be there, but based on the performance of the team and how that's gone, I think it comes down to that, right? Like, you have the first team, Lamar Jackson, second team, Josh Allen. Like, I'm going to stand on this hill, and I know right now it might not be easy to back up just given what's happened team-wise, but I promise you in the next couple of years, it's going to be clear as day who the best quarterback is in the league. And you can clip this and save this down the line, because once Cincinnati gets their shit together and the team success is there as a whole, there will be no question as to who the best quarterback in the league is. And I think Joe will slide into that slot easily over the next coming years, as long as Cincinnati does what they need to do.
My biggest thing with this, and just like to your point, I think Joe Burrow has to throw 5,000 yards every season in order to make that happen. And he's not far off of it from here. But I think just based on the the conversation and what happens with Lamar now over the last few seasons, Josh Allen and his impact on the run game as well. I think when you pair those two things together, plus team success, that's what makes these other guys an absolute standout for that MVP conversation. Wherein I don't disagree with you at all that Joe Burrow is definitely the purest passer that we've seen in probably a decade in the NFL here. But when it comes down to the actual, like, what he's going to have to do, and this is just a tale of fucking Cincinnati football, they're going to have to overcome other bullshit and other narratives to kind of get past that. And with, like, the talent that is Lamar Jackson and the narrative that is behind Josh Allen, those two are going to be competing in this. And we're not even talking about that other guy that's, you know, sitting pretty in the bye week right now. But, like, when that stuff kind of comes around, those guys have that dynamic play to their game, wherein Joe Burrow is relatively just that passing game, right? Like, that is his thing. Now, he is the purest and most talented when it comes to that, guaranteed right now in the NFL. But he's going to have to do that at a level that overcomes the other dynamic talent, which is the run game and the rush talent that is those guys, because that's what the quarterback in the NFL has transitioned into. If you take him back 10 years, Joe Burrow's the MVP every fucking season here, right? If those other games didn't exist, right? But now they do, and they're a part of it, right? Like the Cams and the RG3s and the Deshaun Watson, the guys have kind of implemented that into these game or into the NFL, and it's changed the narrative of how the quarterback position is looked at. And I think that's the biggest thing for me is that, yes, the pure pocket passer is almost like a myth. It's like a mythological creature in the NFL now. It's like it's tougher to have that in abundance because now the idea of it is that you need a running quarterback and like the schemes and everything in the NFL. So it's very tough for me to get there. Like I think Joe Burrow will be that. I think he is. I think he is that guy.
No, I understand that. But
I just think the narrative of the NFL, that's what it is. I think so.
I want you to tell me the last quarterback who was a Russian quarterback to win the Super Bowl.
I think earlier Patrick Mahomes could be considered kind of a bridge on that. Like he did a little bit of both.
I'm talking about like run first. When you talk about Lamar Jackson,
Super Bowl,
do you ever highlight his passing abilities?
No, that's a fair point.
Right.
That's a fair point.
So you look at the Mike Vicks, you look at like the Cam Newtons. Like Cam was close.
Cam was close. Yeah, that would be
I would
closest.
say he was a better thrower of the football than Lamar Jackson. Correct. So
these things argumentative.
Right. But
yeah.
I look at like a running quarterback, and the first thing I say is when you run the football the way Lamar can and how dynamic he is, that makes up for a lot of the things you're not good at from a passing standpoint. So if you keep Lamar in the pocket and you make him throw, I just don't think into a pumpkin.
I don't think you can do that though. That's the thing, right?
Right,
like,
but longevity-wise down the road,
sure,
how
in
long
a few
does
years,
that ability last?
It might run out.
When we go to
that's what happened with Cam.
Right, exactly, right?
Yeah.
So when you lose these abilities, that's huge. But then you see like the pocket passers, they play way into like you got the Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady's, right?
Yeah.
But then I look at, okay, let's go back to this where we started this conversation with the all pros and how you guys are arguing MVP for Lamar Jackson. How many AP first team, second team teammates does Lamar have?
Mm-hmm.
The most out of fucking everybody here.
I know 9 Pro Bowl.
So, and not to mention, he has a, would you say, Hall of Fame head coach who's already won a Super Bowl?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when we talk about this argument with MVP, this guy was drafted to a team and an organization that's already been good, and they never fucking lose, right? Mm-hmm. You got Josh Allen that's been drafted to a dumpster fire of a team, the Buffalo Bills. The same thing with Joe Burrow and what they've done for those organizations. Lamar Jackson going to a team surrounded by talent every single year. It's the same conversation we're going to have. Yet you continue to put him on a pedestal because of how dynamic of an athlete he is. He is a good quarterback, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I do think, I'm not saying he isn't, not taking that away from him, but I'm saying his capabilities, he is surrounded by talent every single year with that team. And you know what? When he was injured a couple years ago and they went to the playoffs and they had Huntley at quarterback, they still made the playoffs with a backup quarterback because of the talent and the coaching that they have there. And that's just my main point when it comes to this is like, look what the man is surrounded with. And I can't wait to get into this game because we can talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's going to be interesting. But yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you to an extent. I think it's just for Joe Burrow to get into that and be in that.
You have to
he has to excel.
The team
not even beyond like the fucking norm. Like it has to be like legendary shit here. Like 5,000 yards is a must for him to get there. I think so because even 5,000 yards, as close as it was this season, didn't get him and the team above the mark here. I get that, but if I know we talked about three wins the other way, and this is a completely different team and it's a completely different narrative.
So
right?
if you look at, there's the narrative out there right now about if they had flipped the game script on the one score games,
or that
they would like Cincinnati would be like 12-5 or whatever, like number one seed, win the division if they had just won those games, which I'll discuss later on about why they lost, and it's not just necessarily Joe Burrow's problem, but it's how much success the team has as a whole, right? Like that's what it comes down to. It's how successful
it's a factor
the team
for
is
sure.
going to be.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever going to win these awards in a losing effort, and that's just unfortunately that's the way it's going to be. Does it mean they're the best player? No, not necessarily. Like these are team awards at the end of the day, almost.
Yeah, but I think this was a more shot like the QB1, and that's why that one stood out for me was. To me, like, is that a shot across, that Lamar is going to win his MVP award here? Like, because of the situation with Josh Allen getting 2, right? I think that historically has led to an MVP as an All-Pro, as the one. And I think that's the conversation that is not really being talked about, is like it's a kind of a shot down to, hey, the whole narrative this entire time was Josh Allen. Then that happens. That historically has led to the MVP award in that position. So that's just one situation that I think garners a little bit more attention because this entire year here, as Josh Allen has led this team of mediocrity into obviously the AFC East title. And just what that meant for the organization kind of going forward. And we had brought this up about how that team was. There was mediocre receivers. There was, situations that need to be overcome here. And the only situation that could be is if Josh Allen went fucking nuclear. And he did. So it's like at this point, the passing stats, it's crazy because every stat still favors Lamar in this grand scheme of thing. The record then favors and the narrative favors Josh Allen. So this is the craziness that is this award. And I love it because it garners conversation like this where we can talk and say, like, what the fuck does this matter? But that's where I'm looking at this whole thing. And if the Bengals get it, then the Bengals need that narrative. And they need Joe Burrow to excel beyond the rushing talent and bullshit that comes with that as well now in today's NFL. And there's just so many other intangibles that need to be factored rather than just, hey, it's a slate of stats, because we've clearly assumed that if it was a slate of stats, then Lamar would be the winner of this award this year. And that's not necessarily the case. So we'll see what happens. I am excited I think it's February 9th that everything gets released. So,
well, like I said, it's everything is swayed a certain way. Like we talked about the Saquon and the Jamar Chase offensive player of the year stuff, and to me that's like not being talked about enough. I think it's Jamar Chase without a doubt. Like it shouldn't even be a question. You have somebody that wins a Triple Crown, and that's not even because I'm biased. It's that impressive for somebody to do something like that, and then on top of that, it's like you just know that it's going to be Saquon to a degree. It's like why is that the case? And it's team success. I think if Cincinnati is in the same position that Buffalo and Baltimore are, I don't think it's a question. I think all three of the guys that led in their categories, Joe Burrow would be MVP, Jamar Chase would be Offensive Player of the Year, and Trey Hendrickson would be Defensive Player of the Year.
I do laugh because
I just think that's it.
I feel like the awards in the NFL are such a difference between the other leagues, because in example, the NHL, you have a given point total that leads to the Art Ross, right? Like, and then you have like all these different things that like Rocket Richard is the goals, and then you have in the NFL it's completely like gray, and then I like that. I think that's exciting for it because it's not necessarily like, hey, you're gonna win this award by doing this, but at the same time, it does. It's no conversation point, and maybe that's something the NHL needs to adapt. Is like throw a little fucking gray in there, maybe change up the award system a little bit to kind of create this conversation. It could be what they need to kind of get over that hump of, hey, we're not quite there yet.
See, I look at that and I'm like, so they have a panel that votes on this, right? I'm like,
yeah.
What the fuck is the criteria to be on
to
this
get on
panel?
that panel?
Like, who are the people that are voting on this panel? Yeah. I would love to see that, because to me it's like
it's opinionated. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Like what's the bias in this? Like where are they picked from? So that I'm always like, oh, like that's lovely. Love to see that. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a team driven narrative, and I'm going to argue this till I'm blue in the face, but I'm telling you guys, like, just keep watching. Over the next couple of years, shit's going to change, and I'll be sitting here nice and pretty because I know how this is going to go, and it's just going to swing my way for sure. I promise you that. But let's get into some of the matchups here we got going into the weekend. Some good ones. I mean, when in doubt, Houston always playing in the 4 o'clock slot on a Saturday, a wild card weekend. Seems to be the narrative. Every year it's the same thing with them. Yeah. But our first matchup here.
Recently. Yeah.
We got Houston, the Chargers. I think everybody is leaning Chargers here.
Yeah.
Right? That's kind of what we're hearing. And me and you just said, like,
trap.
That's a trap. Trap game. Trap game. Yeah. So let's start with your thoughts here, Chappy, on Chargers Houston. I want you to give me a prop that stands out to you from this game, and then I want you to give me kind of where you think this game is going to be going.
I honestly think this game is really evenly matched. Right, like overall on the stats and everything that's kind of going there, just everything that's like even Stroud walking into this conversation and it's not a good situation. Yep. He hasn't been playing well. Like we talked, the last fucking games were just atrocious, inaccurate. Oh my god, it, like didn't look at all like the Stroud that was walking in the playoffs last year, and that's for sure. And I think that's where the narrative is now leading to be like, hey, this Chargers team is humming. They got a good group together here. Lad McConkey is, the next wide receiver one guaranteed. Draft him early next year. He's going to be fantastic, right? But I think this situation, like, to me...
Whoa, you're not even going to mention your guy, QJ, with the 170-yard game?
QJ was running up in my head there because he had the 100 yards... he's
How is this guy's line at like 3.5 catches right now? I'm like, holy shit. That's because
actually he doesn't catch a lot of balls. He just has huge yardage when he has those games. Very true. But he did have a massive game in terms of reception last week too. That being said, I think if anything, I'm probably leaning, Houston in this situation. Given the conversation of what's been happening, Houston has not been on a good tear here. And they've still been just sneaking out these wins and just making things happen. And I think the Charger conversation, obviously that team narrative, the Harbaugh stuff, all this kind of things going around this has been great. Herbert's found his guy, this, that, and the other. They're going to go on a run here, and Herbert's a talent, absolutely. But we're kind of forgetting that Stroud from last year is also a really good fucking talent. And if he can come together on a game, this Houston team will sneak up on a team. And that's where I'm thinking, like, right now, they're the 5 seed going against the 4 seed in Houston. Like, and we're just kind of giving it to Chargers. Like, I think if we look at this, and obviously seeding matters in the divisions that you're in, but this, to me, I want to go more to the Houston side of the ball here and see where that runs, because I think we're kind of discrediting them a little too much in this situation, given the narratives that were the season. Like, they were not healthy consistently throughout this entire year, and they still came out 10-7. And so if we're going to kind of look at it from this perspective, I see more of a problem coming out of the Chargers right now in terms of health than I do with the Texans coming into this game. So I think the Texans are going to kind of say, hey, I'm here. I don't think they go very far. I don't think they go past this, but I think the Texans are going to get past round 1 here and beat the Chargers today.
Yeah. That's kind of where I'm leaning to. I mean, you look at the line right now; it's 2.5 on the Chargers. So I don't know about that, man. Like I get the way these teams have been going differently, but I don't know. Houston obviously lacking in the receiver side of things with the injuries that they had, and I know that's going to be tough for them. But and Joe Mixon just hasn't been the same. Like they haven't got the running game going, so you see the struggles, right?
Yeah.
So I get it. Like it's not. You're not sitting there looking at that line happy to take Houston, right? Like it's with the way they've been playing, no thank you. And the Chargers, they look great. But I look at the line, first it's like 42.5, so they expect this game to be a little bit more of that slower pace. And I agree, both these teams probably want to run the ball a little bit more. But I don't know. When I look at that, I'm just not confident taking Houston in this spot. I think the Chargers have just played better ball. So I'm actually going to go.
That. Yeah,
I'm going to go Chargers in this spot. I think they're just playing a little bit better. I know I love seeing this when the reporters are like talking to these guys about how they're being disrespected, and they're like, well, let's see what happens. So that's where I look at Houston. I'm like, okay, they're being talked about in the negative light. So you want to ride with them, but I feel like that's bit me in the ass a lot this year. So I'm just going to go with the better team here. I'm going to take the Chargers on this one.
Fair.
Now I want to get a prop bet out of you. I'll give you mine first. So based off of previous weeks, I'm going to go Justin Herbert here. Over 20.5 completions. So his last 5 games, he's hit over this line every single time. Now, I just talked about the over-under line in this game. Obviously, they don't expect a lot of points. But I do think Houston's pretty decent at stopping the run. So, and I just think Justin Herbert's been heating up a lot more in the past game. As you've seen, they're also forcing the ball a little bit more too. So I just think you're going to have to throw a little bit more from a Chargers perspective. And 21 completions in a game seems like a pretty easy hit for someone like Justin Herbert. Now, what do you think?
I'm going to go Nico Collins over 6.5. I think they're going to have to lean on it. They're going to have to go their way. I think the matchup is pretty decent. I think this is going to be one of those situations where they're going to have to lean on their guy. I think between Stroud having to go there, Mixon is the other play here, but I do kind of lean closer to the Nico Collins situation. I also think Nico, needs a big game, and I think this is the game that it happens. So I'm going to go Nico 6.5.
I like that. I think the other one that stood out was like Lad McConkey. His reception prop is only 5.5, but it's minus 150. So they expect that. This guy's been hitting 6 catches almost every game, it seems like.
Yeah.
So I get why the juice is there. And then you got QJ, the way he played last game. Like their receptions, the lines right now, not in favor of you winning any money. So
maybe not in their favor of winning a game. I don't know.
Yeah,
we'll see.
Exactly. I might throw
Vegas
that
knows.
On a bit of a parlay there, stick them together. But I do like the Nico thing. He's going to have a big game if they want to succeed for sure. Okay, now let's get on to our next one. I can't wait to talk about this one. I'm fired up. Divisional game for us. Steelers, Ravens in the late slot, 8 p.m. Oh, man. Okay, the one thing I will say getting into this is I don't think people understand how important Zay Flowers being out of this game is going to be when it comes to this matchup. Now, I want to get your thoughts first, and then I want to get your prop on what you think is going to happen in this Baltimore-Pittsburgh game tonight.
So, number one for me right now is when we look at this team and the two teams that are going at it right now, and you kind of line up these teams' overall skill sets, what they are. The Steelers' defense has held them into this season the entire season, right? Like the Steelers' D has been the Steelers' D of past. It's definitely kept them in the running here more often than their offensive play should have, right? And so when I lean into this situation with Baltimore and Pittsburgh, Baltimore's defense over the last 7 to 10 games has been a top 10 defense. It has actually not been the narrative that Baltimore's defense is their problem. Baltimore's defense has actually been part of their strength. And so the last little bit here, where obviously we know what the Baltimore offense is, you have no questions about the Baltimore offense. You have the most dynamic quarterback in the league, and you have one of the greatest all-time rushers ever to play this game. And so we know what that is. Now, granted, Zay Flowers' situation is obviously concerning, but I don't think it's going to be the turn, because Mark Andrews has looked like a top 5 tight end this season in the last little bit here as well. He's come back to that skill. And I think just overall, the dynamic part to what is Lamar Jackson will cover the problems that are in the receiving core right now. He will escape and he will find a guy. And so I don't think necessarily the Steelers D is going to hold that in check, nor do I think that the Zay Flowers situation is going to be the be-all, end-all as to why the Baltimore Ravens are going to have a trouble here. Plus, I think the offense for the Pittsburgh Steelers has looked fucking atrocious. It has looked terrible. That 2-minute drill has to be the worst 2-minute drill I've ever seen in my entire life last week. Like, had to be the worst thing I've ever seen. So I don't trust this Steelers offense to literally get past anyone. So I'm going to run completely with Baltimore. Baltimore 9.5 even looks fucking nice at this point. Like, I know you're going to go on the other side of this potentially, but I'm thinking, holy shit. Like, I think you pair up the defense the way that they've been playing. You pair up, just Lamar in general with Derrick Henry, and this offense and this defense both handedly trump anything that the Steelers are offering. And I've been on the Steelers train, but last week, that game, maybe it's just recency bias. I don't really give a fuck, because this team has just looked fucking terrible over the last 4 weeks. Like, there's nothing that reads to me that the Steelers are in any fucking conversation to even be in the playoffs right now based on the last 4 weeks. If they extended that 1 more week, 2 more weeks, your guys are in there and not them. So that's the situation that I'm looking at.
Yeah. Now give me your prop bet, buddy. What do you think is the big standout for you here?
You know, honestly, just Derrick Henry on any kind of rush attempt line is just going to trump anything. Like, I don't like the Steelers 20. D obviously is what it is. 20.5. I just think they're going to lean on their guys. Like, I just think they're going to lean into this. They have to. You just mentioned about the Zay Flowers situation. So the run game has to be a big part of the reason that they win this. If we're looking at it from a coaching perspective, obviously Steelers, Tomlin, they're going to try and restrict that as much as possible. 20.5 is a big line, but Derrick Henry's Derrick Henry, and they're going to run into it. They're going to try and get him going at any point during the game. They're just going to keep trying the run until it breaks through. That's what this Baltimore team has done. Derrick Henry, 20.5.
Well, I would agree, and I think you have to, because based on last time when they played the Chiefs, their last playoff game, what did they do? They got away from the run, and then that fucked them up royally, right? So for me, when I look at this game, you know what time of year it is? It's playoff football. You know what time of year Lamar Jackson doesn't show up? It's playoff football. So I look at this and I'm like, 9.5. Wow, okay. Well, you get a Baltimore team with their number one receiver missing. Now I'm going to look at the rest of the receivers on this team. You got Mark Andrews, sure, pretty competent tight end. And then I look at the receivers. We got Rashad Bateman, who's generally banged up in and out of the lineup multiple times. And then you got like guys like Nelson Aguilar, Tylan Wallace. Like, none of these guys are doing it for me. So I'm not too worried about the passing receivers. Like, I would just play man coverage with these guys all day because I'm just not afraid of them beating me. Mm-hmm. And then I would put all of my resources in that box against this read option running attack and figuring out, okay, how do we stop these guys? Because like you just said, Derrick Henry is going to get his. And we know what Lamar is capable of. But you know what Pittsburgh also has is a tremendous pass rush, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you – the thing I look at first is Lamar Jackson, when the pressure is on, tends to try and do a little bit too much sometimes. So when I look at Pittsburgh's pass rush, number one, and then Lamar Jackson, I think he's going to be scrambling a lot and trying to run and do those things, right? That's just initially when the pressure is on, that's what he does. So that'll probably be a prop I'm looking at is Lamar Jackson rushing attempts. And then that can coincide with, if they win, you also get the kneel downs as well, right? So that is something I'm looking at. But I think he's going to be a little bit more flustered than you might think, because I do think Zay Flowers is just, he's their best receiver. And when you don't have a talent like him on the field, I'm just not necessarily afraid of the other pass catchers in this offense, right? Like, I'm allocating all my resources to stopping this running attack and getting up on these guys and playing aggressive. And I think the Steelers know this team. If it's anybody that's given Lamar Jackson and the Ravens a tough time, it's been the Pittsburgh Steelers. And if it wasn't for last game that happened in Baltimore where the Steelers fell on their face and then the Ravens finally broke through, we would be talking about this game in a whole different light. But because of the way Pittsburgh's been playing, we all know how that goes. So I think you got to give the Steelers in a spot where you got a head coach and a team that's just gone through this. What are the questions going to be after this if the Steelers get run over again, right? Like, you got a head coach that's been in these positions, his back's against the wall, and then you got Russell Wilson who's fighting for another deal next year, and then you got a team that's just had their tail between their legs because of the last few weeks. I don't expect them to show up and just get rolled over, right? Like, I think this is going to be a very close game. I think they're going to be able to keep it close the entire way through. They have a tremendous kicker on that side in Pittsburgh, and I think Pittsburgh has a chance to win this game completely if they can just shut these guys down a little bit. And like you said, they have to be able to move the ball, right? Like, you got to get George Pickens going. You got to get these guys involved. And that's going to be the secret sauce here is, like, can this offense, can they play better football? But I think it's going to be closer than you think. And it's a division game, man. Like, it's Lamar Jackson in the playoffs for me. And how funny would this be? Lamar Jackson, more MVPs than playoff wins? That's fucking hilarious.
Yeah, I think it's definitely.
What's the narrative going to be?
That's definitely a thing. Hey, we gotta prove it, right? I think I think he has historically 6 touchdowns and 6 interceptions, and has averaged about 185 passing yards in the last in all of his playoff career, which is obviously atrocious. That was part of the narrative and conversation about what Josh Allen has done in the playoffs comparatively to Lamar Jackson, and whose prove it is bigger. And I think the biggest thing for me, and just the standout here, in the last 3 games, the passing completions per game, the worst in the NFL right now, in the last 3, has been the Pittsburgh Steelers. They have been terrible against the pass. And I don't necessarily think that Lamar's escapability has not then going to lead to, hey, I'm going to find a guy that's going to be open. He has, as much as we're talking about that, his passer rating and everything else, Lamar has elevated his game in the passing side of things. Mm-hmm. He has escaped, and he has hit players in coverage, and as they escape from their coverage due to his dynamic ability, right? This has happened throughout the season. So even regardless of the situation with Zay, it's not just Zay. It's Bateman. It's Andrews. These guys have been able to get out of coverage. And you got Derrick Henry, by the way, that's just going to be lingering in different offset screen packages. And it's going to happen, man. Like, I just think there's going to be scenarios where, yeah, you can have the best pass rush, but you got to be waiting for that guy on the other side of it. Potentially, as you pass rush in, you know, Derrick Henry might be on the flip side of this, just being like, hey, give me the ball and let me do my thing. Mm-hmm. So I think there are going to be option plays that are going to be definitely a challenge for the Steelers to kind of read off of. And I think that's where we're going to have to kind of see what this team's about. But in the last 3 games, this team has been the worst in the NFL. And so I'm going to run with that.
To the Ravens winning this easily. Like, the narrative is what it is. And you talk about that. I think and I've said this before about the Ravens, it's like you have to get pressure on Lamar in those first couple seconds. He's just not a good quarterback getting the ball out quick. So if you force him to have to throw the ball immediately without having to scramble and do all that, like, I think that's going to be the difference here.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much with him and his play does that matter all the time either, though. Like, I think if he can get out and still make a play happen, which is what he's shown this year, is, you know, sometimes time to ball and time to throw doesn't matter if you have a guy like that can make plays happen other ways. That's what we saw with Josh Allen. That's what we've seen with Lamar. So I think at the end of the day, like, some of that, you know, time to throw stats and all those kind of things, you can kind of throw it out, right, in this conversation, because I don't think it's necessarily, it's not 1-for-1 with the rest of the league. It is a different player here.
Yeah, so I think that kind of wraps up the Ravens-Steelers game. We'll do our full picks here when we do the bracket at the end. I think now we're going to bounce over to the Sunday slate of games here, and the first one is the most intriguing, according to you yourself, Chappy, and one Dan Orlovsky, with the Buffalo Bills and Denver Broncos here in the 1 p.m. Slate on the Sunday. Now, I want to get your thoughts on this game. I will say that from a prop betting perspective, these two teams are kind of identical in which they're so balanced with running quarterbacks, which makes the props a little bit more tricky for me to kind of hone in on here. But I want to get your thoughts on this matchup first and foremost there, Chappie.
Yeah, so this is definitely, for me, just on a feel, this is the most exciting game of the weekend when it comes to the potential of the upset. Denver coming in obviously has been, red hot in terms of what they've had to do to get into and secure their position as well. The Bills are what they are. Obviously, Josh Allen didn't play in that last game. A lot of the starters didn't play, got the snap, obviously maintained that Ironman kind of record and slate and just kind of making sure that continued, but he hasn't really played, obviously, in that last game. They're fresh. They're ready to go. So in terms of the Bills Broncos here, I think the biggest thing for me right now, a lot of the edge right now on a lot of these sports books and a lot of these different websites is actually giving it to Denver right now on the money line. Now, I don't necessarily think that they are going to do this. I do think the Bills are going to make this through, but I do think that this is
8.5 on the Bills, man.
8.5 on the Bills. I know this is crazy, but
favored.
I would actually still, unlike what we just talked about with the Steelers-Ravens game, on the 9.5 and say like, hey, that's an automatic cover. At least for me, that's what I'm believing. I think the Denver on the 8.5 is actually within range here, just given the situation of it's a great defense. You're running and conflicting against two metrics here. Obviously, Josh Allen is the least sacked quarterback in the NFL. On the flip side, you got the other defense that is going to be coming in different ways to get at Josh Allen to move the ball. We've talked about this team as a complete team when it comes to the Bills side of things. They have been, they've been elevated by Josh Allen's play. The receiving core hasn't been the most outstanding receiving core. James Cook out of the backfield, he's done his thing. I think 14 touchdowns of the regular season, right? He had a great year.
Yeah, more than that, actually.
I'm not sure if I know.
He was up there with, like, Gibbs, man. Like, he's had a lot of touchdowns this year.
Oh, we'll have to check
anyway,
on that.
Regardless. But he does get his touchdowns. But
he does get his touchdowns, for
his
sure.
His line isn't very high in this game either.
No, I think when it comes down to it, I'm just kind of checking out the rushing TDs there. 16 touchdowns.
See,
14 was then coming into that last. Yeah. So no, I think when it comes to that backfield, I think it's funny that we talk about that, because if you look at that from the narrative that was even Lamar Jackson and the Derrick Henry conversation, Derrick Henry has 16 touchdowns. Obviously has more yards and has contributed on a far greater scale out of the backfield for that side of the team. James Cook has not done that much, obviously. But it's, in terms of production value and where bang is for your buck, TDs are where it counts. So when it comes to that, in terms of Josh Allen and James Cook, that backfield is equally as dangerous when it comes to how this has been performing, especially Josh. I think Josh has 12 rushing touchdowns. So that's a pretty big deal. That being said, Broncos defense, one of the best in the NFL here. So there is a lot of conflicting. You got one of the best offenses running against one of the best defenses in the NFL. I think they put up, a little bit of a stalemate here, and they kind of go at each other and make this a little tighter than what's expected. So as far as goes for a game prop, I'm 100% going Denver 8.5. I think that's going to play its course. Now, Bills and Josh Allen, maybe they just show up and crush them. I just think it's going to be tight. I think it's going to be a lot tighter than what it is.
Yeah, I mean, just based off of the matchup, like I mentioned Orlovsky there talking about how the matchup kind of, and what Denver's able to do is going to be a little bit conflicting with Buffalo and their style of play. So that's going to be interesting to watch. They talked about Patrick Surtain and him just kind of playing one side of the field and shutting that down and forcing Allen to go the other way. But when I look at this and just how good Denver's defense is, talk about how athletic their D-line is, the pressure that they're going to get on Josh Allen, I think the one thing that stands out is I do think there's going to be a little bit more pressure on Josh Allen to be Josh Allen. So for me, and we talk about the props, I think the one thing you can count on is this guy's going to try and win this game, and he's going to do everything possible. So I look at like his rushing attempt over right now, 7.5, and then you look at the yardage right now. Those are things that I want to look at, especially his attempts, considering if he takes a knee too, those are attempts that you can get as well. But when it comes to the matchup, I probably agree with you on the point side. Like, I know Buffalo is the better team. It's in Buffalo. I just like the matchup could give them a bit of trouble, and I expect this to be a little bit closer of a game than people might think. Right, so 8.5 points is something that I'd probably take as well. But then, like you said, like, man, Buffalo could just hand these guys a big fat L just easily, right? And then we just don't know what. I don't know what Denver team we're going to get, right? Like, I know they've been great down the stretch here. Yeah. But to go into
pressure,
Buffalo,
though.
Yeah, that's no pressure.
No pressure.
They're, like, playing with house money, rookie quarterback.
Yeah. So what I bring this back to is there's a Leaf series that happened against Washington way back in the day in the NHL, right. And you have
was that the first year they made the playoffs?
It was the first year that they made the playoffs with Babcock as their head coach, and they played free. There was no expectations. There was no, like, it was obviously a big time where they hadn't done it, but then they just kind of played free, and they took it all the way to Game 7. And that's the situation that I kind of just see eerily reminiscent of this game, and what this is to Denver is, Denver hasn't been there since 2015, I believe.
Yep,
and
since Peyton Manning won the Super Bowl with them.
Since they won. And so there's no expectations for them to win it all this year, right? That would be a miraculous story. So I think they come in and they just kind of play free as they have been in the last little bit. They showed also they could lock in when it counts. And I think that's the narrative that this game is. I think Josh Allen has to prove it. He's had, 2 or 3 divisional exits in the last 3 years. Yeah. When he got through, he had to go through the big dog and Patrick Mahomes. So this is a prove it game more to the Bills side of things than it is to Denver, and I think that's gonna play a role in this game.
I think one quick question before we move off these games is, who has more pressure on them to win in the playoffs this year, Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson?
That's a good one. I think it's Lamar. I would agree. So Josh Allen, in the grand scheme of this, obviously, he's been, I want to say, discredited in the last, he's performed in the playoffs and just hasn't gotten to where he needs to be. But he's also had to run through, Kansas City 9 times out of 10. Not saying that everybody those are matchups, right? But everyone has to go through that. But then Josh Allen's been kind of like that ugly stepchild that no one wanted to give credit to. Like, oh, this guy's actually doing his job, but not being able to kind of close on it. So I think that's the situation here, wherein if you look at that same conversation on the other side, now you got a 2-time MVP, you got that whole narrative running behind him, and we just talked about the playoff win success. You got a 2-time MVP, he's got to win. He's got to show up here, and they got to have playoff success here in order to kind of make this, the whole thing. I'm doing the bracket over here, and as I'm going through this, I'm like, I want to pick the Ravens here. I want to go through and I want to pick the Ravens. However, what tells me I should pick the Ravens with the historical success of the Ravens here under Lamar? So that's, to me, I can say, hey, the Bills might get shut down, maybe even the Ravens, but are the Ravens going to be able to kill, 4 games here? And that's the question. So I don't know. Like, the Bills went on a generational run in the regular season here. We'll see if it carries forward into the playoffs, but in order for them to do that, Josh Allen does have to play out of his mind. But Lamar, in order to kill this narrative, this monkey on the back, he's got to play as to what he has over the last 3 seasons and more. And this team has to show up and perform. So
yes, they do. This is a big playoffs for them, man. But I would agree. I think the pressure is on Lamar, but I mean, almost equally so for Josh in this spot after the season that he's had.
I feel like it's the same thing either or. Really, it's tough to decide.
Someone has to end up beating Mahomes here. Or
I think that's the best thing about Mahomes. Is Mahomes is just sitting here. You're like, I'm here, guys. No one gives a shit. Everyone's just like, fuck, we already know where that's leading. We already know where that's going to head. Yeah, but that also.
Like, do not do that to that team.
No, you don't. Just don't ever do that.
So we're going to see, because if Josh and if Lamar both can't beat Patty Mahomes here, I'm just going to be sitting here just whoop.
Yeah.
Still can't do it, guys. Still can't do it. And who's the one guy that's done it? Mr. Joey B. And then there'll always be next season, guys. But that's cool. You guys can have your MVPs. That's cute. So pressure's on, fellas. We'll see who performs here. Now let's go over to the NFC side of things. Let's go. We got Packers, Eagles. I can't wait to talk about this because you know my feelings on the Packers and their success. And something I want to kind of point out here. But Eagles favored by 5 points. You got the Packers, the 7th seed, going to Philadelphia. I think it's pretty straightforward for me what's going to happen here. But what do you think the narrative here is with this game, Jeff?
So I love this game. I think if we talk about Denver and the Bills on the other side, that could potentially be an upset. I think the Packers are that team to upset the Eagles in this moment if there is any of the games to happen. And there's just only one reason as to why. A.J. Brown this week came out. There was some potential lingering injury there. Jalen Hurts has not been healthy coming into this situation. They're going to have to lean heavily into Saquon and the other side of things. But on the flip side, obviously, with the situation with, Jordan Love has just been fucking terrible in the last few games here and has not showcased anything. Josh Jacobs, on the other hand, has been the lever that they need to pull every game. But this is a very complete team. It's not just about the offenses, right? And I think when we break this down, obviously, I think Philly definitely has the edge. They should. They absolutely should. But the Packers have been that kind of sneaky, team that kind of comes up and shows up in certain scenarios because they are so complete, right? And if a team that can kind of rock a boat here right now and kind of put some unnecessary pressure, and that's why I think the line is at -5, is the Green Bay Packers. Because if we were going to talk about this conversation about the Eagles and the Packers not a couple weeks ago, where would that line be for Philly? And I think it would be much greater than it is today. So they keep games tight. They're able to kind of rock the boats a little bit. Right now on some of the edge favored on some of these sportsbook, it's towards Green Bay. So I think there are some opportunities here where this Packers team might show up and might put a little bit of unnecessary pressure on the situation. Plus, we don't know what the situation is with the health with Jalen Hurts. Obviously, he's been out. They've come up with some stories kind of, say he's good to go. I don't know. They got to rely on it. And we've just been talking about Jalen Hurts' consistency in the last little bit. He's, what was it? Passing. It was a big thing. Well, A.J. Brown's got some question marks here now, too. They're going to have to lean heavy into the run game. And, the Packers haven't been great against the run game all season long, but we'll see how this kind of transcends because you kind of have two balanced teams running against each other, even though the records say otherwise.
Yeah, fair enough. So what's your prop bet in this game?
So I'm going to run with one of those classic boomer bust scenarios here. So Jaden Reed.
oh, God. Jaden Reed props. Gotta love him.
You have to go with a receiving person at this point in this game. I think Christian Watson was the other narrative that's been happening on the flip side of the ball, right? So someone's got to get the ball in this. I think Jaden Reed is a boomer bust scenario. I think in order for the Packers to win, you got to have a guy historically in the games throughout the season. Jaden Reed has been that boom potential in big games and games that needed to be won. So I'm going to go with Reed in this scenario. His line right now is 3.5 receptions. I think that's going to get done. You're either in it or you're not with him. The volatility is massive. But this is one of those games where sometimes you just feed the guy that's, potentially going to be the one to kind of win you the game. And I think Jaden Reed has that potential to be that guy, especially against the Philadelphia secondary. So that's where I'm going to run with this.
I like that. I think when I look at that perspective with Christian Watson being out, somebody's going to have to get the ball, and you're not going to beat this Philadelphia team by running it. I hate to break it to you. They're good at stopping the run.
Yep.
This is going to come down to Jordan Love. Now, for me, when I look at it, I think with Christian Watson being out, I'm actually going to lean towards Jordan Love and the under in this game. Under 227.5 passing yards. He's gone under this line in 3 straight games and 5 of the last 7. And all but 2 quarterbacks have finished under their passing prop against Philly's defense. Now, the other thing is Love is also 3 for 7 towards his passing prop with Christian Watson out of the lineup. So, and that's in the last 2 seasons. He's just 1-6 on the road as well. So when Watson is out, he struggles to hit his passing yardage line. And I talked about this. He's a yardage guy.
It's a deep ball threat.
That's his deep ball guy. With him being out, I think he's going to struggle mightily. And I just don't think Jordan Love is that good of a quarterback. So, and if Green Bay is going to win this game, they need to be in it, and they need to have the run game be a factor. So I'm going to take under on the yardage for Jordan Love. And I just think he's going to have a tough time against this Philadelphia defense. It's not the matchup you want as a Packers fan, for sure.
Yep.
Now, let's go over to our next game. What do we got in we talked about that's the
Commanders, Buccaneers.
Game. Commanders, Bucks in the 8 p.m. game on the Sunday. This game is going to be interesting to me. I think the Buccaneers are a bit of like a dark horse here with the way they've been playing.
Yeah, and they're the higher seed.
Over too, right?
Yeah, like there's a lot going on here. The Bucks had to battle right in that last game here.
Yeah.
And I think I was looking at this as I'm building out this bracket here. I'm going, who's the team? Like who's the team in the NFC that's going to be a little bit of a challenge to kind of, the matchup that's going to be tough to predict. You can kind of run through it in these and kind of go back and forth. But the Washington team is a young team. They're a new team. They haven't been in this yet, at least in the last thing under Jaden Daniels and the new regime. I think they have the potential, especially against the deep threat with Terry McLaurin, to kind of shake up some shit. And they have the run asset and Jaden to kind of make sure, that they get the ball downfield quickly, which I think is going to be the difference here. I'm still going to I'm going to actually take the Washington money line on this because I think that they are going to be able to kind of rock the boat here. But in terms of a prop, I'm going to take Baker Mayfield's passing attempts. Ooh. I think the other side of this, 34.5 right now, he's going to have to pass. Right, I think there's a big element here where he's going to have to kind of take over. This is what he does in these games. We saw it, over the last couple weeks. Carolina obviously wasn't expected with 32 on 30.5 pass line. There has been situations where his line has been set high. In any of those situations, even 35.5 against Baltimore as an example, he ended up with 45. And then 32.5 against the Falcons, he ends up with 50. So there are situations where he has to show up in those bigger games against those tougher opponents. This is one of those situations, obviously, in a playoff game. I think he's going to end up hitting that line. And that's where I'm kind of leaning with the props.
I like that. That's going to go hand in hand with mine. But if you look at this as the highest scoring total for the slate of games wildcard weekend, so there's obviously some expected points to be had. Now, when it comes to the defense for Washington, so this is going to be an interesting matchup to watch. It's Mike Evans against Marshawn Lattimore, right? We got the old Saints matchup here. Now he's on Washington, and what's going to happen here is we know that the past matchups, Mike Evans hasn't really had his way with Marshawn Lattimore, so I think he's going to have a tough time. Now, who's Baker going to have to look to? It's going to be your boy, Chappy, Jalen McMillan. So I'm looking at his receiving yardage right now. I think his line currently 49.5, I think it is, and McMillan's gone over that in 5 straight games. So
he's a new target, man.
Down, and the way that he's been performing, I'm going McMillan all day over that total. We know that you're going to be able to pass against the Washington secondary, and especially if Mike Evans is locked up on Marshawn's side of the ball, I'm going to lean with Jalen McMillan. He's going to have to step up for this Bucs team. So that's my play. But I think this is going to be a fun game to watch, man. Washington being in the playoffs again. rookie quarterback, and then the story that is Baker Mayfield and how Tampa's kind of crawled their way back in here, and they're a pretty good team. So that'll be fun to watch. And then we got our last game we got to talk about. It's the Minnesota Vikings at the LA Rams being played in Arizona. This is going to be an interesting one. The Rams, I just don't think are getting enough credit. At the same time, Minnesota, we know, is the better team. They came off the letdown game against Detroit, right? So you think it's a bounce-back window for them. I think L.A. now, the fact that they don't have the home field advantage is, that sucks if you're a Rams fan, especially for that team. But when you look at this, the line 2.5 on the Viking side of things, I think this game's going to be a little bit closer than people think. Remember, the Rams beat these guys earlier in the season too. So I look at this game, I'm like, Rams have a good offense, man. They can move the ball. I think the Vikings are going to have a tough time stopping that passing attack, especially with Puka Nacua and the way he's playing. And this is going to be an interesting one for me, right? You got a head coach in Minnesota, Kevin O'Connell, who came from Sean McVay's coaching tree and the Rams. So this is two teams that are going to know each other, and this will be a fun one to watch. But initially, the main prop, when I get into this, I think is what I was just talking about, is the Puka Nacua one. And I'm going to go with the over on his receptions because he's just been that guy, 7.5. And I think with Minnesota, they got offensive firepower too. The Rams defense isn't exactly the greatest. So I think they're going to have to keep up. And Stafford's going to have to throw, and I think Nacua just gets the targets. And I'm going to go over 7.5 on the receptions on his side of the ball.
Yeah, I would say this is definitely the most interesting game. Number one, just the narrative of what's coming from it. So the Minnesota Vikings obviously playing that game last week. Lions absolutely, if anything, of a demoralized victory that could be handed out was, hey, Detroit Lions, I'm hurt, I'm beaten down, I'm broken, but by the way, Jahmyr Gibbs is going to run all over your fucking team right now. And I think that's an example of, hey, if we're going to compare, some players and some styles to, what's going to happen in this game, if not for the most underrated fucking running back in this league in Kyren Williams, is that same story, right? Mm-hmm. So you have a running back that just exploited a team's defense. This Minnesota Vikings team, obviously past that, has been phenomenal all season long. Not phenomenal, but very good, right? And they've obviously kind of defended against that. Now, I think the Vikings are being a little too discredited given their successes throughout the year and as a complete team. The Rams have been one of those teams that has been kind of tricky to understand because of injuries, because of how this team's had swing and the inconsistencies there. But historically, Matt Stafford, playoff ball, has been very, very good, right? I think that's what we have to kind of lean into in a lot of these situations is, hey, they've been there before, not far off from, a couple years back, maybe more than a couple years back, but they were a pretty good team, right? And I think this team is a tricky team to win against with the Rams. That being said, I've been doing it all year. I can't stop now. Minnesota Vikings money line. I got to run it. I think this is going to lean into a scenario where I think the Vikings then have to play what would be the Eagles if the Eagles take this in Green Bay, and then they're going to have to then match up, and I'm curious to see what that matchup looks like, and we'll get that into the bracket, but I'm going to go Minnesota money line. I do think this team, still as much as that last week was demoralizing, has to come back. They've been able to do that all season long. They've been able to run a course, stick to their plan. Sam Darnold had a terrible game, an absolute terrible game. Like, there's nothing to say that Sam Darnold and what he showed last week wasn't anything that the Jets were like, yeah, we're done with this, right? But that's not the Sam Darnold we've seen all year. So I'm not going to say that obviously that's a high-pressure game and he's going to just flop again. I think he's going to come out and be able to do some stuff against this defense that otherwise is not not as advertised currently. So I think when I'm looking at this is, it's probably going to be a tighter game than we expect. I think Kyren Williams on the prop line for his attempts is actually relatively high, all things considered, against a Minnesota run defense. I think it's currently sitting at 20.5. That being said, whenever a line gets creeping up towards that top end spot, I love to take the over because they know something we're obviously not seeing in any of these case scenarios. So I think they're going to lean heavy, just like Detroit did, into this offense and run the ball a lot. I don't think it's going to necessarily be Stafford's game to win until later on in. And so I think they're going to try and establish that run early, just like we were saying. Like I think Jameer had a heavy amount of rush attempts early in that game as they just tried to establish that against Minnesota. And eventually it broke through, and Kyron is no different. Kyron will do the same thing, and I think that's how Sean McVay is going to run this. So I'm going to go with Kyron Williams on the over on his rush attempts, but I will take Minnesota money line on this. I do think Sam Darnold and this team come through, and I just want to see Minnesota win, man. Rams, you've had your chance. You've had your time. You did it. Great job. Love it. I want to see Minnesota fucking come through here.
Great job. Oh, man, I love it.
What else for a chip is a great fucking job? You wouldn't know about that in our league, but hey, that's how it comes through.
Still got it in another one. More than you can say this year. Chappy.
Yeah, it was a shit year, but hey, chips up. Banners there.
There you go. Yeah. All right, okay. So we've recapped a lot of the props and gone through the games. Now we're going to get into the actual playoff bracket itself.
Let's go.
Let's see how we fare. Now there's two ways you can cut it. I think, like, when you make the NFL playoff bracket now, you should technically be allowed to make two. You have the one that just paves the way for the Chiefs to win another Super Bowl, and then you have the one that, if everything is fair and said, then that's another bracket. Because we all know the default is the Chiefs are going to the Super Bowl and they're going to win it all, so why not take a bracket with that? But then if everything was fair, you would have alternative matchups. But let's dive into that. Let's bring up the bracket here. I'm going to share my screen. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pick based on that. All right, so bracket is up. Beautiful. So, Chappy, why don't you lead us off here with your playoff bracket selection?
All right. So, first up, that 5-4 game, Chargers against Houston. I'm going to run with Houston, as I have obviously earlier today explained.
All right.
I think Houston is going to push through the narrative here. I think C.J. Stroud is going to have a pretty decent game. If not for Joe Mixon, his team is going to come through against the Chargers. I think too much is going in favor of the Chargers these days, so I'm going to stick with Houston on this one. I think this is an all-time trap game of what's been thrown out there with the Chargers. So I'm going to go Houston. Not a whole lot of anything behind that other than, hey, just Houston's got to fucking figure this out. And I do think that they've all had down games. Stroud has had down games. Mixon has had down games. I think some point that's got to break the other way. Some law of averages, hoping. Right? Exactly. So I think that's, at the end of the day, I think Houston's going to come through in that situation. Moving on to that next game, we're going Baltimore.
Yeah,
Baltimore.
No question,
I can't say that Pittsburgh's going to pull off the upset here just with how they've been playing. It got obviously very detailed in how I think about this. They're giving up the most completions in the last 3 games, most completions in the last game as well. I think they gave up 37. I think regardless of the fact that Zay Flowers is out, Derrick Henry's going to come through with this team, and they're going to just run the ball through Pittsburgh all the way into that second round. As far as this goes, as much as I want to believe in Denver, I can't believe in Denver right now. I am going to run with Buffalo in this scenario.
All right. I think look at that.
This is going to be an all-time MVP type of game decider.
You got no wild cards coming through either, eh?
No, I don't think that that's going to be the case. I just don't see. I think the Chargers, if any of the should be the one that follows through. I don't think Pittsburgh has enough going for them offensively to make it through. And Denver, I just think the balance, that their team has had throughout the season, heavily relying on the defense. Obviously, Bo Nix has had some great games here at different points, but it's been up and down. I can't say that the Buffalo Bills have had an up and down season. Granted, their division is probably one of the worst in football. I just don't think necessarily that Josh Allen and this team are going to hit that divisional exit this season. So I think, again, just kind of feeding into the historicals here, Buffalo's going to take that, and we're going to move on into the AFC divisional.
Okay, now who you got out of Houston, KC going forward?
So we know.
Okay, so Kansas City is moving
I don't even
forward.
have to. I don't think I have to say that. I don't think there's going to be
Yeah.
an upset in KC against Houston. This team is just, like I said, I think they've been rounding into form. Their weapons, their wide receiver weapons that they didn't have. Well, lo and behold, this team is starting to figure this out. And Patrick Mahomes has had a little time to rest here. Will continue to have more time to rest. So if there's any injury bullshit that comes out of this, oh, he was hurt, I'll fucking just like lose my mind because this guy's had 2 to 3 weeks to sit on his shit and figure it out. I'm pretty sure if we looked at a high ankle sprain and we did the timeline to that, 3 weeks is probably going to get you good if you were playing in the last game. So yeah, I think that's the situation there. As far as it goes for Baltimore and Buffalo, this is the most interesting one that I was looking at. And I was trying to play it through on both sides of the ball.
Who's going to break through here?
Who breaks through, right? And I think for me, the one thing that stands out for me is Baltimore's defense in the last 5 to 10 games, especially the last 5. They've been a top 5 defense in the last 5. Buffalo's defense has been getting scored on a ton, and they've just been able to power their way through with offense. They just lost to the Patriots in terms of their secondary players that are out there, but I don't think that doesn't speak to kind of maybe their depth on this as well. And I just think Baltimore is just such a powerhouse offense that it's going to break through this. Like, Josh Allen has to have one of those 4 to 6 touchdown games, both on the ground and in the air, in order for them to break through what is this Baltimore defense right now, as well as Lamar Jackson. I think will show up, right? Like, I think this game here against Pitt and Baltimore will either show us whether or not he's ready to take on up until the conference or not, right? And if he does against the Steelers and just kind of wipes this, as I think he will, and this team is just built. We just talked about how deep this team is, Pro Bowl and all. Like, this is probably the deepest Baltimore team that they've had, along with that. So you got a better backfield. You got a better all-around team. I just think Buffalo's going to get stopped here again. And unfortunately, that's the situation. So I'm going to go Baltimore KC.
Oh, we got the same AFC Championship garbage as last year. Eh? I love that.
Yeah.
All right, now, who
well, why don't we swing?
on?
Why don't we
Baltimore,
stick over to the other side?
Save
and
it?
then we'll,
all right,
yeah, we'll
let's
save
go to the
it.
NFC here. Okay,
All
let's
right.
start with our first game. You got take your pick, the LA-Minnesota game here at the top, 4 versus 5. Who you taking?
I'm going to run Minnesota. I think Minnesota is the better team this year all around. Even though the Rams, obviously, I think if we're going to break this down even further and beyond the players, we're talking about coaches. Obviously, Sean McVay against Kevin O'Connell. I think Kevin O'Connell is going to be a little bit of a difference maker here. Obviously, Sean McVay knows how to control a game late, and we've seen that throughout the season in order to get some wins. And I think that's definitely a big part of this. But when it comes to the all-around team, I said nothing should stop LA if they're healthy going and making a deep run. But I do think just that game last year was a bit of a shock me game for the Minnesota Vikings. They're going to be playing hard. They're going to be playing tough here. And I think that if they can get to Stafford early with the different schemes that they can do, plus on top of that, they have the weapons. All their weapons are ready to go. There hasn't been that injury problem all season long. This team is healthy. This team's ready. I think Minnesota takes this. No big deal.
All right, now we got Tampa Bay, Washington.
It's one I've been mulling over, but I said it just earlier. Washington. I'm going to roll with Washington. They're going to make it through this first step. I think Baker has a game. I'm not going to say that he doesn't, but I just think there's going to be a situation where Jaden is just going to play a little free here. And I just think the run element against Tampa is going to be a big difference maker. Tampa has not been good against the run, and I think Washington has a lot of different opportunities to play against that. And then obviously the big play opportunity with Terry McLaurin and Jaden Daniels. So I'm going to play with that.
All right, and then Green Bay, Philly.
I'm going to go Philly. I'm going to stick with the guns here with Philly. I can't say that Green Bay, the way that they've been playing, will win this game definitively. I think at the end of the day, they will get stopped by Philly. I think the Philly health is the question mark, but Philly altogether is a better team even with that. Over Green Bay, they have better offensive talent. They have better defensive talent right now as things have kind of developed here. Wouldn't have said that at the beginning of the season, but I can say that now. And I think that's going to be the difference maker in this game.
All right, now we got who's going to be in the conference championship?
I'm going to go Detroit.
Washington. Yeah, I think nobody's going to argue that one. Detroit's been the best team.
Yeah, even hurt, right? Like even hurt, they've been there and they've been showing up offensively. Like this team is just so hard to stop offensively. Like, and this is what we said. This team is a titan when it comes to their weapons. They lost David Montgomery and it didn't even show last week against the Vikings. Like this is just how this team's operating. Jahmyr Gibbs is an absolute monster right now. When I was saying that he went supersonic last week, like he actually did. Like there's like he went in gold mode here and just went crazy, unstoppable. And that's not even the full part of their game. They have Jared Goff that's efficient, and they can just cut up teams in different ways, unlike any other team in the NFL right now. So Detroit over Washington,
and then Philly, Minnesota.
So this is where I want to say that this is an interesting game. I've been looking at this, I've been staring at this, and I'm going to go more to the narrative and the fun in that right now than anything else, because Detroit just knocked down Minnesota, and I want Minnesota to beat the Philadelphia Eagles and go into this NFC conference round. I think that would be a fucking great matchup to have come around. We talked about the NFC North all season long. The NFC North is the best division in football. This is just going to be that summation of the entire season of what this was for the NFC North. And it's going to come down to Minnesota and Detroit once again. And I think we just talked about the best game that was supposed to be last week. Well, I think that's going to be the best team that we're going to watch going into that. So I got Detroit, Minnesota.
Now give me your Super Bowl matchup here, bud. Let's start with the AFC side.
All right. Does Lamar Jackson take on Kansas City and win? I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say yes.
Puke.
I know.
My bracket's going to be wildly different. I love it.
Which is great. So does Kansas City take this? Yeah, I probably think they do. But I just want to say that, hey, there's going to be a time where if any a team and any a talent and any thing is going to be able to get past them, it should be the Baltimore Ravens team. They're one of the most talented, well-rounded team. I think Kansas City is going to be just sitting there waiting. I don't think Houston's going to be a challenge for them. I think they're going to get through that matchup without any problem. But then when it comes to Baltimore, they're going to have to play that team completely different. And we're going to see how this kind of comes up. Now, the only thing that terrifies me in that pick is Lamar Jackson's got to show his maturity, right? He's got to show that he's developed into a playoff quarterback, and he has not yet done that. For him to get through 3 games here, that's going to show a lot of fucking maturity. And that's what terrifies me about this bracket. But I think if it does show, like I said, in Pittsburgh, and it does show again in that conversation with what's been happening with the MVP in that Baltimore-Buffalo game, then it has to show up against Mahomes, right? And in order for that to be the narrative that clicks through, I think, 28? I think the last time that the Baltimore Ravens won was with a quarterback that was 28. And there's a lot of other things that are going there conspiracy-wise.
Narrative, shut up. Give me your NFC pick. I'm done hearing this Baltimore
That's it.
crap.
You love Baltimore. I know you do, wholeheartedly.
Who you got,
deep down.
Detroit or Minnesota?
Detroit. I think some of these things, if that lasts 4 weeks, we have, a situation where we're running into this team. Hopefully they're getting a little healthier along the way. I know a lot of these things have been season-long ending injuries, but I do think regardless of that, this team is just, they're on one this season. There's nothing stopping them.
Who's your winner?
Detroit,
Super Bowl champion.
I think that's time.
There you have it.
Eminem can be happy.
There you go. Now, let's go over to my bracket. Jeff's got Detroit beating Baltimore in the Super Bowl. Mine's going to be a little bit different. Is it going to be a little bit biased? Maybe, but I have my reasons as well. So, we're going to get into this. I'm also not going to milk this as much as Chappy over here. Let's keep this short and sweet. Let's get her through. So, first game, you got Chargers-Houston. I think Houston's look like complete ass. Do I think they're going to play better? Yeah, probably. But I do think the deficiencies in the passing game is going to hurt them a lot, and they're going to struggle to run the ball again. So, I'm going to go Chargers. Then we're going to go over to this game, and Jeff's got the Ravens going to the Super Bowl here. I'm going to cut that run short on the very first game. I'm going to take the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Holy fuck.
Now, the reason I'm going to take that is because I told you guys I think that they're going to struggle without Zay Flowers. And I think Pittsburgh has their back against the wall. They have nothing to lose because they've been abysmal going into this. Mike Tomlin, Russell Wilson, and then you got Baltimore, who's just been, they've been propped up on this pedestal the entirety of the season. And I think that's going to come to a head. And guess what? Playoff Lamar is going to show his true colors right away, right out the gate. Steelers win that game. Then over this one, I got Buffalo. I think Denver might keep it a little bit more entertaining, but I think Buffalo wins the end of this. And then when we go over to this side here, divisional round, I got obviously the Kansas City Chiefs going through. I think they're going to beat Pittsburgh. And then we go over to this game, I got Buffalo going through. So we're going to get the game that everybody wants to see, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes in the AFC Championship game. Now, over to the NFC side. Oh, man, I really, really want to take the Rams here. I really do. I think Sam Darnold could potentially turn into a pumpkin in these big spots. Man, it's tough to go against the Vikings the way they've been playing, though. But
do it.
Oh, man, I want to do it so badly. You know what? Just because they beat them earlier in the year, I'm going to go the Rams. So, got Rams first. Next up, Washington, Tampa. I'm going to go with Tampa Bay. I just think them being at home in the spot, rookie quarterback in his first playoff game. I'm going to go with the Bucs. Do I think it's going to be easy? No. And I think it's going to be a good game, but I think they're going to struggle to run the ball, Washington, and I think Tampa's just going to have a little bit more success. Okay, and then to this one, lock. I'm taking Philadelphia easily. I think you're going to see Jordan Love's true colors. They're going to struggle, and if they can't establish the rushing attack, that's going to be it for the Green Bay Packers. Okay, and then we go over to the NFC Championship game here. I'm going to take Detroit, gets another win over Stafford and the boys. So Stafford's going to be 0-2 against Detroit in the playoffs. And, Detroit's they're going to get their flowers now, and they're just going to keep rolling, and it's going to be probably one of the greatest trades that Detroit ever made was trading Stafford for Jared Goff. Then we go over to this game. I got Philadelphia handedly. I think Philly is the team. They're going to be much better. They're just better overall. And then we get into the main matchup here. Okay? And what that's going to be is, I'll start with the NFC side. Save this suspense. I'm going to go Philadelphia. I just think they're the best team overall. Take Philadelphia in the finals. And then over here, does Josh Allen beat Patrick Mahomes? He's going to fall short again. Kansas City's going to go back to the show. And then what do we have? Super Bowl matchup, repeat, Philadelphia, Kansas City. But this time, your champion, the Philadelphia Eagles. Kansas City does not three-peat, but they get to the show again. So, there you have it. A little bit different. We're going to see how this plays out.
I love it. I love it. Completely different.
Completely different. I figured the obvious route is to take, the main ones and go the Detroit Lions and the Baltimore Ravens, which is what everybody else's picks are. But I figured I'd spice it up a little bit. Now, that kind of wraps up the show for today, guys. We got a couple hours till the first game starts. We appreciate you guys tuning in. Chappy, you got any parting words for the guys?
Hey, playoff ball's here. Let's enjoy it. Click that bell, subscribe, like. Let's see how this rolls. Love to see how this bracket pans out.
Yes. We're going to keep up with that every single week. But appreciate you guys tuning in. Until next time, it's the Chappy Bengals Podcast. Catch you guys later.
Yeah.